We do anti-violence work and resource navigation and that sort, and we do capacity building and advocacy work. So we work with our local leaders and officials to ensure that laws are implemented in a way that gives dignity to LGBTQ people, including the most recent Milwaukee County conversion therapy ban. The objectives for today with this PowerPoint, we are going to reflect on and assess beliefs and behaviors around sexuality. We'll describe terminology and concepts related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender populations. We'll describe health disparities affecting LGBTQ people, communities, and highlight the role of social determinants of health. Using a framework of minority stress theory, we'll understand the impact of homophobia on LGBTQ people, and identify and understand trauma-informed strategies for creating a safe, culturally competent, and welcoming environment for LGBTQ people. Are there any questions about the intended objectives today? A little bit about me, so you know who's talking to you and why. I'm not going to go through, but I currently serve as the Director of Prevention, Care, and Empowerment Services at Diverse and Resilient. I have a BA and an MS at Concordia, and I'm currently, trying to finish off at Cardinal Stritch, and I'm exploring a teach out at Tiffin University for my PhD. I love the work that I do. I love to be entrenched in community. I've been working in community for 15 years in different grassroots initiatives. I started at the Boys and Girls Clubs with a 12-year stretch. I've been with Diverse and Resilient now for 3 years. I'm really proud to be able to do this work and to be able to make space for people within my community. So when we talk about understanding sexuality, and there is, let me see, I'm gonna just populate all of them so we don't have to worry about going through. We're looking at it from this perspective, right? We're looking at the ethical, cultural, biological, and physiological things that occur around sexuality. When we talk about ethical, we're talking about ideals, religious beliefs, moral opinions, and actions and values that form and shape the ethical belief for each person and how they operate within their bodies. We talk about culture, we're talking about family, neighbors, house of worship, peers, schools, dating, marriage, long-term relationships, laws, customs, and media that forms and informs the decisions of people and their sexuality. We talk about biological. We're talking about reproductive health and options, sexual arousal and response, growth and development, physiological cycles and changes, and physical appearance. Right, so it's layered when we talk about biological, but all of those things are present in a part of every human's experience. And then when we talk about physiological, we're talking about emotions, experience, we're talking about self-concept, motivation, expressiveness, learned attitudes, and behaviors. Right? So how do we interact? So what are those concrete feelings that occur within those moments of sexual arousal, things of that nature. So do we have any questions about the current, the framework in which we're talking about sexuality from the ethical, biological, physiological, or cultural perspective? Cool. Take a second, reflect on your own. Then you can write it down or you can just, store it in your brain. A message you received about your sexuality. It could have been personal to you or a message you absorbed that was directed at your gender through family, peers, media, etc. We'll take 2 minutes, let you reflect on that, get a story in your mind. We'll have a discussion on the back end of that from just a few of you who are brave enough to share some of your experiences. All right. Anyone willing to discuss what are some of the messages you received?
I think like preschool, oh, is that your little boyfriend? Is that your little girlfriend?
Mm-hmm.
Conversations like that with kids.
I respect that. The normalcy around as a girl, that's your little boyfriend. As a boy, that's your little girlfriend. And that being normal. I appreciate that.
That sex is something that occurs between a husband and wife when they love each other.
Valid, very valid. That's a very common thing you'd hear from families.
I grew up in very deep South, and I was always often told, especially by my grandmother, for my need to lose weight so I would be desirable to men and would find me attractive.
That's loaded. Forgive me, I'm hot. I done came out that jacket, tied up this hair, and it ain't enough.
I think spiritually, as a Christian growing up, it was definitely instilled, to be wearing dresses and not, act a certain manner, act a certain way. So that was very much instilled.
I love that. I oftentimes talk about, when I taught sex ed, I always talked about the female flower and the male box that we were all put in. You got to act a certain way, dress a certain way, move a certain way. Yeah, that's real. And I think oftentimes it is, not a scapegoat, but how else do you express it to your children, or how else do you express it to people that you love? The complex nuances of sexuality. Not to rag on anybody.
When traveling to the homeland, always being asked as an adult, are you married? So now that I'm married, I'm gonna tell them, yes, I am too. It's like, now I am. But anyways, it's so funny because I was like, why you guys always ask me, are you dating? Are you married? I'm like, what is it? And it was always directed to the fact that I was also called marimacho, which is kind of more like a woman who looks and act more like a male. I have male traits. So they're like, okay, where are you having children? Where are you getting married? Where are you having that? I'm like, so it's, it was so funny because up to like 10 years ago, they were still asking as an adult, and I'm like, no, quit it. But now I can tell them, yes, I am married, yes, I have kids, and yep, it's a woman.
Here for it. Here. Let them feel awkward for a second. You've been asking all this time. Now I present to you my choice, baby. Okay, I'm here for that. And those awkward conversations about, expecting families and like, well, that's not everyone's dreams, So I really appreciate that story. So as you can see, we all come. Okay, I see one more before I move on.
Don't let any man ever see your body. That's how it was for me. Hide that, men are dangerous, that kind of thing. Backfired, I guess.
Very valid. Very valid. The I wouldn't say the urge to protect female-bodied individuals, right? And the dissonance between I wouldn't say it's the whole reason why we celebrate Denim Day, right? Wanting it, like I must have asked for it if it happens to me, but that's not how it goes. Appreciate that. I appreciate that. Anyone else before I move forward? I appreciate those, and as you can see, just in the few that we did share, it's a wide breadth of how we've talked about sexuality up until this point. And when we move away from this conversation today, we won't all have that same understanding. I'll just ask you to go on this journey with me and explore some things and expand your own understanding. So we could talk about understanding sexual orientations. We're going to go through a couple descriptives of the different orientations that are within, and I'm thinking I want to just populate so I don't, boom. These are the 5 I wanted to cover today, very basic. It is very much more expansive than this, so I like to also give that caveat. It is much more complex, but we can always start simple. I call this 101, LGBT 101, right? This is the basics. So to define these terms, I've used them before already, but now to give them, a definition. So a lesbian is a woman whose primary attraction is to other women. We have gay people, typically men, right? Typically men, but not always, whose primary attraction is to members of the same sex. Catch the nuance and the difference into it and why they are saying so. Even a woman can say that she's gay and mean it is that she's dating another woman. We have bisexual, a person whose attraction is to more than one sex or gender. We have queer, a term that can be used to describe gender and sexual identities, claim a unique identity, or describe the LGBT community. And so that's one of my favorite ones. It's what I call one of those umbrella terms. And that's why you'll see when there's different ways of reading out the acronym. Some people stop at LGBT, some people say LGBTQ, some people say LGBTQIA+, right? all of it is correct. I'm not disputing any of those, but I also would press that no matter how we do it, we're othering someone in our group, because stopping at IA and putting a plus means all of the people in the plus are othered, right? When we stop, for me, I say LGBTQ because my Q is for queer and questioning, for people who are questioning their sexuality, right? Because that is the umbrella term. I'm not gonna ascribe anything to you. I don't know what your preferences are, so I'll use queer. I say I'm a black queer man all the time. I am a person who sleeps with men, so I'm gay, right? But you'll hear me ascribe to queer just because it's easier. It's more encompassing. It's more expressive of the entirety of who we are. But again, I throw that out as, extra facts. As long as you try to be as inclusive as you can in the language that you use, you'll be fine. We talk about asexual, a person who has no or low desire for sexual activity with others. And then we have straight or heterosexual, people whose primary attraction is to members of a different sex or gender. Any questions about any of these terms?
Does queer have a historical negative connotation?
It absolutely does. It's one of those words that has been reclaimed and retooled. So it is, it's kind of person to person on whether or not they'll ascribe to it or they'll adopt that identity. But you see nowadays it's more accepted than it is rejected. But it absolutely came from a place of harm, a place of meant to be othering, meant to downsize or disenfranchise a community and a population. But they have since reclaimed it, re-owned it, and retooled it.
So asexual, you said it says low desire for sexual activity. So that means what? Just no desire with any sex? Is that what that means?
Yep. So when we say no or low, it could mean once a year. They want to get sexually active with a person. It doesn't necessarily, because sexuality again it's a very broad spectrum. But for people on the lower end of things that need something to help describe their sexual interests, because if you have a partner who has the understanding that since we're together, we should be having sex regularly, but you are just asexual, you have low to no sexual desire, how do you communicate that with your partner? That's it. Baby, it's not you, right? That's not my yam. I don't know what to tell you. I just don't, you listen to your body. If you're horny, you're horny. So an asexual person, they do have those same sexual desires, but they're just much lower than the, I wouldn't say the average person, because I hate that language too, but lower than typical. Great questions. Three more terms. No, five technically, because it's two on the top. When we talk about understanding gender identity and expression, so gender identity is a person's internal, deeply held sense of one's own gender, and gender expression is gender as presented through one's names, pronoun, clothing, haircut, behavior, voice, or other characteristics, right? So that's that internal versus external, right? How do they present in the world? How do they come out to the world, right? So my gender expression today is masculine, it's male, right? My gender identity, I ascribe as a male, right? So those are both internally, I will say he, him in my head. I use him terms, right? So again, internally, my gender identity is male. Gender expression today, I'm presenting as a male. I use he, him pronouns. So that's how that particularly works. But when we talk about that, then we got to get into the one part of the acronym. So LGBT, the actual T, is the only thing in that list that is not a sexual orientation. All the rest of them are. The T is actually a gender. And it's important. That's why I think they are the most important part of our community and deserve the most respect and attention. Most of my work is fighting to make sure that they are seen and feel brave and feel safe and feel honored. So cisgender is one of those terms that comes up and people are always kind of scratching their head, but we'll start with transgender because it's more popular, and people have at least heard that, or there have been other terms that have like kind of grown into that. So back in the day, people were tranny, transvestite, transsexual, all of those terms. Now it's people of trans experience or transgender people, right? So it's a term for people whose gender identity and gender expression is different from those typically associated with their assigned sex at birth, right? And then we talk about cisgender, a term for people whose gender identity aligns with those typically associated with their assigned sex at birth. I'm a cis man. All right, I was assigned male at birth. I still ascribe to a male gender identity. I still present every day as a male. So I call that an extreme privilege of being a cis-bodied male individual. If you were born female, you currently ascribe to being a female, you are a cis-bodied female. We talk about gender fluid. It's when a person's gender identity and expressions varies within or beyond the gender binary. It includes non-binary and gender non-conforming people. Those are all those confusing terms when you first get introduced to them. But it's really fancy wording to say that the binary that we have all been confined to is fake, right? And I'm gonna do what I say and how I feel every day, okay? So if today I wanna wear a wig and some 6'6" pumps, I'm gonna walk this runway that they call life every day, and I don't wanna hear a word about it. Now, tomorrow if I snatch this wig off and rock a fade and some sneakers, that is what it is. No such thing. It's okay. It could. But then they, them is just one of many. It's a whole list of acronyms. They could use they, them, theirs as their acronyms, or purse, as an acronym. It all kind of depends on who the person is and how they want to be ascribed. But that definitely is a great example. You will see, there are a lot of people who are cisgender who will use they, them pronouns. Okay, I have a lot of folks, and I will admit, I'm not perfect. I messed up. And we'll talk about that in a bit. How do you correct when you misgender a person? They've actually used they, them pronouns, and you keep using he, him, or she, her because they present male or they present female. That's okay. It happens. Even within our community, I've done it so many times. Oh, baby, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. And sitting there with my heart dropping, like, "Ooh, please don't be mad at me because I just misgendered you." But it was not intentional. It was a slip of the tongue, right? But it's okay. It happens. Great question.
Is there like a term for if your gender expression is different than your assigned sex at birth, but not necessarily your gender identity?
I'm trying to understand the nuance of that question.
Right, because like the gender expression is like,
How you present yourself.
Versus at least how I was interpreting the gender identity is more of like an internal feeling of like what gender you subscribe to internally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I would venture to say if a person was changing their expression, then their identity is likely in that same ambiguous field that their expression is, and they're likely gender fluid, whether or not they ascribe to that. So a lot of this is about learning and growing and feeling comfortable in using these terms to explain the nuances of what's going on internally. So a person might not be able to verbalize, okay, I identify as a male internally, but today I know I'm tripping. I got my heels on. I'm doing my things. It's not always articulated as smoothly as I'm doing it here. I'm definitely taking very complex constructs and making them very simplistic. And so I don't want to take away from how complex they really could be. Great question, though. Okay, they all populated too. So, understanding the basics. We talk about behavior, expression, orientation, and identity, right? So behavior is what we do, what we say, and how we act. So again, that's the outward expressions, the people who we kick it with, the language that we use, because the gays got language for days. They come up with all the different expressions and colloquialisms. Like, baby, it's fun. It's never. I love my job. for that reason in and of itself. The expression, the external display of gender through a combination of dress, demeanor, social behavior, and other factors, generally measured on a scale of masculinity to femininity. Right? So how masculine are you acting? How feminine are you acting? All the things. Your clothes, whatever. Orientation, the general direction of our attractions, fantasies, and behavior. So what are we called to like, to do? What gets our attention? What is yumming up our what they call it our pleasure zones inside of our head? Like what lights us up? What gets our things going? And then identity, a person's internal, deeply held sense of one's own self. Identity is not what someone else ascribes. Right? If I see a person, I can't tell. Most back in the day, you saw like, I don't know what to call it. That ain't your job. That ain't your job. It ain't to figure it out. It ain't to question. It ain't to call. Ask. Ask their name. Ask their pronouns. If you get confused, we'll talk again about how to make that mistake, make that correction, move forward. Right? But it's not your job to be Inspector Gadget and figure out all the ways and all the things. Keep it simple. Keep it on a need-to-know basis. Right? How can I address you in a way that is respectful? How can I make you feel safe and belong here? Any questions about any of that?
Well, it's interesting when you bring about that. Like, is it easier just for me, or like with my clients, I just like to say their name so I don't trip up. I'll find myself if I'm in session, like with one of my transgender clients, that I see a female, right? So for me, it's hard to take that hat off. So for me, I have to literally like intentionally say the name, so I don't. Because if I write my note, it's hard for me to not say that. It is definitely not an easy thing. It's a struggle at times, and I have to catch myself a lot. So you're right about that. But I have been, they won't tell you to your face. I've been told, I've made the mistake, and they'll tell someone else, and then a colleague will say, you call them a she, and it's a he, and I'm like, I didn't know. Why did they tell me? So I don't know if there's that barrier. They don't feel comfortable if you make a mistake, like calling you out.
I think in that particular case, it's the power differential. Not necessarily that they don't feel safe talking to you. You're providing a service, a key service. They're vulnerable in that moment. And even afterwards, when they go back and tell somebody else, it's not necessarily to get you in trouble. It's more so that's how they're advocating for themselves. They are in a world, in space, where allies are far and few in between, right? And so that's why I always, when I come out and do these, I say we need allies to be louder and prouder than ever, right? I don't know if it's you getting a badge that has a rainbow sticker on it so kids can recognize, again, you are trying your hardest and there is some dissonance, but we get it. We know how confusing it is to be around us and to understand and to get it correct. People give grace when grace is due. That's one thing because again, I've messed up. And I work at an LGBTQ org. I work with trans people. I work with non-binary people. I get their pronouns wrong regularly, not intentionally, right? I'm always the staff who's correcting others, right? I heard you say she is he, right? I do the gentle nudge. But again, the person on the other end of that, they felt the same pressure, right? They still, the weight of, and I hate to say how heavy of a burden being misgendered is, right? I can never minimize that. So apologizing, acknowledging where you made a mistake are all great things. It's not going to take away from the harm that just occurred, right? So you got to let that harm process. They got to go heal, right? But it's a part of their journey. And that's something that they'll get.
I feel like working with youth and kids, it's especially important to acknowledge that they have not had that life experience over a span of time to even be comfortable enough within themselves to feel empowered to correct anyone. I sit in courtrooms day in and day out with these kids that get misgendered by legality, and I always, like, my go-to is like, want to correct me, you want me to. and they will let you know. So I mean, especially when you're working with kids, like just ask the questions. Like they'll let you know where they're at. They'll let you know where you're needed. Um, sorry, that was just my.
I appreciate that.
Just the youth part of it.
That's valuable, and I'm glad you spoke up on that because, again, like you said, ask. They'll tell you. They are one thing I've come to learn. LGBTQs, they ain't scared to tell you nothing. Not a thing. So you ask them a question, be prepared for your answer, okay? Because they're gonna give you one.
Yes, I had an adult client, well, I have an adult client, and the name of the paper is different than the name they want to be called. So I did make a mistake twice. And so I just apologize. I can't wait till you get to that part and show me how to, correct it. But
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I have been there. It's interesting to run a program because to find ways. So I'll always ask, what was your dead name or legal name, if that's what we need. But then I'll find ways to, like, inside of our database, I will only put their preferred name to kind of help staff not get caught up with that, because I know once you know that this is what a person's name is, it's kind of hard to break it apart, right? So I get the nuance, and they get that as well, right? That is their name, right? Whether, like, they know it's their dead name, we don't, and we honor their presence, we honor who they are and their identity, right? They know you're doing your job. And it's hard, and I can't even give you a tip on how to get past what your eyes done saw, your mind remembers, right? So you can't get past that part, but and we'll talk about it. Apologize, keep moving on. Do it.
I don't know if this is relevant to what we're talking about right now, but I work with children entering into care on the front end, and a lot of our children who identify differently than their birth gender have to be placed according to their birth gender versus how they identify. And we run into that issue because obviously if you're now identifying as female, but we have to legally place you in a male group home. Like, if there's something that, we can do to help in that, I mean, I don't know if it's something you discussed during this, but we're seeing more of that, and I'm disheartened by it, that it's really hard to these kids.
That's why we exist.
So I run Courage and KE Group Home as a group home specified for LGBTQ identifying youth. And we literally, the reason we exist is because there's no like safe practice legislation surrounding group homes in Wisconsin to protect those kids. So if you need us, Courage and KE is the organization, and then the Courage House is the.
and I just ask, I'm wondering why on the front end more initial assessment workers aren't asking for that, because a lot of these brand new children coming in here are placed in our centers, which are gender specific. So it would be interesting to see maybe why they're not trying to place you even on the front end, right?
I'm sorry, I don't know, like.
Keep going.
No, that's okay. I mean, we are only able to provide 5 beds. We only age from 12 to 17 at this time. We just bought a second facility that will age from 17 to 25. We've only been open 4 years. I mean, we are the only existing one. So space and availability and things, I'm sure, are what plays the most factor in that.
I just want to give an extra, I very much love Courage. They are an amazing organization, have been doing great work in the city. I do recommend, if you have students, send them that way. Absolutely. And then question 1 and question 2.
I just wanted to talk to what she was talking about. I actually work for the Department of Children and Families in the Child Welfare Licensing section, and we absolutely want children to be placed in facilities that align with their gender identity. So if you are having that issue and you're reaching out to these providers and they're telling you that they can't take youth that don't align with the sex that they're licensed to take, you can reach out to me. I would be more than willing to help you with that, because that they can absolutely take those youth.
You asked a question too about the IA, why aren't they asking it IA? We're kind of exploring, like, what can we do to support people as they're having those conversations? So this is something that the department is just now kind of allowing us to just start facilitating this conversation. Really hoping to, like, I don't want to say any specific output, because, like, it kind of gets shifted around, but we're hoping to
Nope.
It also does have an email address if you're looking for technical assistance in working with LGBTQ youth and child welfare in the child welfare system. You can reach out to us through that. Yeah, got you.
I think there's another bigger issue within the state and with the counties in children, youth, and family, because all their paperwork is done in SACS. SACS only divided to two, and you have to pick one or the other, and I think that's what makes it very difficult for children that we work with, that identify differently, from what their birth said, sex was assigned. And so it is hard, because once they're put into SACS, or even SACS, that's what they do. Our out-of-home placement paperwork is all done through that, our referral, so court paperwork has it on a petition specifically. So there's certain kind of placements that you can't have without a judge's order. It's on the court paperwork. So I think that's another hurdle to go through.
Well, and I'll do it real quick, I promise, because I know we're completely going off base, or off topic, but in the placement unit for professional services group, when they come in, we actually developed our intake to identify how they identify if they have to be called something different. And so this information, I realize that this won't go into SACWIS, but at least when these referrals are going out, that the providers are able to see and identify how these kids are identified.
I appreciate this discourse because conversations like this are important. That was a resource that was shared just now, and I feel like countless youth will benefit from the information that was shared just between the bodies in this room. So I appreciate that. We'll move on to LGBT health disparities. For this, I'm actually going to be using data from the Youth Behavior Survey, Youth Risk Behavior Survey. The last one just came out in 2021. The new one will be coming out soon. It's a biannual, so every other year, so the odd years they release it. This year, this one actually had a trends report that was really nice. We won't go really into all of those details, but really our goal in the next couple slides is to look at the differences between LGBTQ youth and, I shouldn't say LGBTQ because they did not, in this survey, tease out data for trans people, so it's LGB data. But talk a little bit more about the survey. It's done every other year by the CDC, so it is a national survey. It is self-reported health behaviors and demographics from students grades 9 through 12. Information gathered includes violence, unintended injury, sexual behavior, alcohol and other drug use, and tobacco use. Right, so all the things, and I love, when I go into this, I want to preface this with LGBTQ people are not born any less healthy than their heterosexual counterparts. But we're about to talk about health disparities that plague this community in a disenfranchised way. So I say those things with that preface, right? We are just as capable of as our heterosexual partners, but this is the data that we have currently. So we'll start, and it goes from section to section. I'll give you kind of an overview as we move between the sections. This first one with the green color is sexual behavior. I'll read most of kind of the statistics, but all of the slides will stay the same format with the breakdown of the data, and I'll talk to y'all about that again. The first in the red up top, it's the sex, and again, it's broken down in the binary. I don't like the binary, but it's male, female, right? We have the race and ethnicity broken down in the dark green, going from American Indian or Alaska Native at the top, Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native, Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander, white, multiracial. And then the purple, which is one we'll be focusing most on, sexual identity, right? The heterosexual group versus the LGBTQ plus group is in the purple. And then sex of sexual contacts, right? So opposite sex only, and any same sex are those two. So the last two subsets are really the data sets that we'll be looking the most at as we travel through this data set. And I'll again read off all the information. If you have any questions about the particular question, and Mark, there is a small print. I can see it well on my computer, not the best, but I can give you all the details that I can, right? So first one, 4 or more lifetime sexual partners, right? This is, and again, out of the national survey. And then if you look down in the purple where we're focusing on, while there were 6% of heterosexual youth who responded to this question, there was 7% of LGBTQ plus. I also like to preface this with, that's the minority. So while the percentages are close, the burden is stronger, right? It's a smaller subset of kids who ascribe to LGBTQ. Second one, use a condom during last sexual intercourse. We had 55% of heterosexual youth. We had 42% of LGBTQ youth. We talk about effective hormonal birth control use. And while I say the purpose of LGBTQ sex is not always procreation, that is something they need to be educated on just as much as heterosexual people. We don't know who they're engaging with, so they need to have all the tools to make all the decisions that they can in a safe and effective way, right? So again, this is effective hormonal birth control use. We have 34% of heterosexual youth and 28% of LGBTQ. Condom and effective hormonal birth control use, the dual method use, and that's the gold standard for everyone. We had 11% of the heterosexual group responding, 7% of LGBTQ plus individuals responding there. Ever tested for HIV? 5% of the heterosexual population, 7% of the LGBTQ population. The first time those statistics switched and it was higher with the LGBTQ. And it just happened to be for HIV. Isn't that interesting? Tested for sexually transmitted diseases, again, and higher for so we have 5% for the heterosexual, 6% for the LGBTQ. So it looks like we're getting them to test better, but how do we address the disparity that they have within the sexual disease transmission rates? We're moving now into the orange category, which substance use. I couldn't read it at first. Substance use is this next category. So current alcohol use, that is 22% of heterosexual youth, 26% LGBTQ plus. We have current marijuana use at 14% of heterosexual, 22% of LGBTQ plus individuals. Current electronic vapor product use, right? 16% of heterosexual, 22% of LGBTQ. Ever used select illicit drugs, 11% heterosexual youth, 21% LGBTQ plus youth. Last one for substance use is current prescription opioid misuse with a 4% response rate for heterosexual, 11% response rate for LGBTQ plus individuals. Now we are into the experiencing violence section of the survey. Here we have 6% and then 8% for LGBTQ were threatened or injured with a weapon at school. We had 14% of LGBTQ plus students responding that they did not go to school because of safety concerns, compared to 7% of heterosexual students. Electronically bullied. That's 13% for heterosexuals. That's 27% for the LGBTQ youth. Bullied at school, that's 12% for heterosexual, 23% for LGBTQ. Ever forced to have sex, that is 5% for heterosexual youth. It is 20% for LGBTQ youth. Sexual violence by anyone, it is 8% for heterosexual youth. It is 22% for LGBTQ plus individuals. And that was the last one for the experiencing violence section. Now we're moving into mental health and suicide ideality. So persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and that's 35% from heterosexual students, 69% for the LGBTQ individuals. Poor mental health, that's 22% for heterosexuals, that's 52% for LGBTQ plus individuals. We talk about seriously considered attempting suicide. 15% of heterosexual students, 45% of LGBTQ plus individuals. We have made a suicide plan, 12% heterosexual, 37% LGBTQ plus. Attempted suicide, that's 6% and 22%. Then injured in a suicide attempt, 1% for heterosexuals, 7% for LGBTQ. School connectedness. 65% of heterosexual students felt connected to the school compared to 52%. Yes, 52% of LGBTQ students. And then parental monitoring. Heterosexual students had 88% response rate, while LGBTQ had 86%. And last stat for you all, for all these sad stats that we've been going through, unstably housed, 2% of heterosexual youth and 4% of LGBTQ plus youth. So those were the major ones, at least. And again, it had a set of trends, so you can watch how this data has been going over the last 10 years, because that's how long the study has been going. Again, I'm excited to see the next one come out to see if there's been any more fluctuations post the pandemic. This does include the first year of the pandemic in some of the responses, so you can see some of that. The trends were definitely interesting. I can make the digital version of that available if anyone wants. I can email that out at the end of the session. Any questions about any of those disparities, about any of those stats? I want to say yes. Okay. You're not able to manipulate the data as much as I would like to as a data nerd. So it's just the presenting is a PDF document, so it's not manipulated in a way, at least not how I've been doing it.
You just identified as a data nerd, so I will ask my question. So the sex and sexual context, why are those both bigger? Why wouldn't it be, can you explain like the last two bars?
Baby. It didn't make sense to me because I thought that measure should be the same as the purple. But I guess that also shows the dissonance in how people ascribe for themselves versus what they're actually doing. That's the only thing I can think of, because again, it's a self-report. So if I ascribe to be heterosexual, but I still have sexual contact with people of the same sex, there goes some of the distance within the data in and of itself. Listen, I can't explain it. I wish I was on the team, but that's what we got. But great question. And then I'm just gonna populate this. So, LGBT students significantly likely to report injuries or experiences of violence at school, carrying weapons to school, feeling unsafe at school, and skipping school because of this, poor mental health, suicide ideation, planning, attempts, and severity, and a lifetime use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. LGBT students are significantly less likely to report feeling loved and supported by their families and feeling like their teacher really care about them and give them encouragement. I think that's important for us to think about when we're out doing the work that we do. I think we all know the kind of the impacts of being disenfranchised. So as we move forward, just keeping kind of that in the forefront of our mind. When we talk about anti-gay oppression that creates this unfavorable social conditions, some of the ways in which that shows up is housing instability, insufficient school or sexuality education, internalized homophobia, social exclusion and isolation, unsafe sexual situations and behaviors, lack of knowledge about sexual risks, escape or avoidant coping, and resignation and hopelessness. Right? These are the tangible byproducts of homophobic behavior and how it can impact LGBTQ people. And this is why I say we need louder and prouder allies than ever before. If we do intend to change any of the disparities we just walked through, and any of the things that impact this community intimately. Are there any questions so far? No? I think I just asked this. So let's look at minority stress theory and why is it important for us today. Prejudice toward minority people is stressful and can lead to adverse mental health outcomes. So in this descriptor, it gives you the 3 types of stress that we can deal with. I loved at the time I presented this at Marquette, and the teacher pointed out, "Oh, look, an exam is on there." It's like hilarious. But there are types of positive stress that once we get through, we'll feel good, we feel accomplished, we feel strong, right? There are things that are tolerable, we have no choice over, right? So death was a good one. End of a long-term relationship, a move, those type of things are stressful, but we can make it through those. But then there are these toxic stress that folks have to deal with, particularly in the LGBTQ community. So neglect, abuse, and is that parental addiction? Yes, it is. Parental addiction. Those things I feel like are more common, more broad. When we talk about homophobia, that is more isolated and situated within the LGBTQ community. And then we talk about people of color when we talk about racism and how they have to impact or work with that. Any questions about how we talk about stress in this particular case? Great. Now we look at the comparison of how minority stress employs or helps us understand the oppressive nature of like that additive stress, right? Straight youth and LGBTQ youth both have stress around family dynamics and regular stressors. I pose to you that the family dynamics and regular stressors of LGBTQ youth are a little more extreme. In this particular example, they're illustrated by bigger spheres, right? To show that they have an increased impact, and then you compound that with homophobia. Now, I also like to throw out, and we didn't talk about HIV in this case, but that creates a whole nother thing. And it's whether you are HIV negative or HIV positive, how are you going to interact with that virus? How are you going to protect yourself? And the feeling of being targeted by all of that messaging. So when we talk about minority stress theory, we're talking about the unique and additive ability for stress to be compounded on people of minority descent. So, when we talk about stress for LGBTQ people, we're talking about external, objective stress, events, and conditions. We're talking about the expectation of stressful events and the vigilance this expectation requires, and the internalization of negative societal attitudes. Now, what happens with the absorption of all of this stress and residing with all of this? We have those negative health outcomes that comes out from that, right? Drinking, smoking, unhealthy eating, unprotected sex. List can actually go on and on, you ask me, but those are the ones we list out specifically. There is a way for us, and we can't control all the factors. We can't stop all the things, right? But again, I always love to say we need allies louder and prouder, because we have the ability to interrupt some of the negative outcomes for our people by providing adequate social support and positive coping strategies. We have the ability to empower the people in front of us to overpower the stress that is inevitable. We can't take the stress away. We can't stop it from coming. We can't change life, right? But we can be that sufficient support to help negate some of those negative outcomes for those people. Any questions about minority stress theory and how it works and how it applied here?
So I know looking at it from a provider standpoint, what about as a parent? Like when you have, the parent of a child of LGBT and you actually see that firsthand, how do you, help, how does a parent kind of help the LGBT youth, navigate that? I know that's a lot of questions, maybe we'll...
No. That's serious.
Question, but
No, and we got time. We got time. So my mom said the same thing, right? And let me say, when I came out 17, 18 years ago, maybe, so I was in high school. Me and my mom had a fight. I got put out. I moved in with my older sister who had came out 10 years before me. Right, so you would think mom would have learned between one kid to the second kid that okay, but she hadn't. It took me 2 years before I returned home, and eventually I think we had another falling out, and I remember leaving again. But by then I was an adult. But when I returned, when I got to a point where I felt like I was mature and wanted to have a real conversation with my mom, I sat her down and we watched Pose. And we started having those conversations. Mama, this is what I mean when I say this. Like, I've already buried my friends from HIV. I've already buried, community members from drug loss. Like, so I'm not, I think my mom always forget because I went off to college and I did the things that she think that I escaped all of the things that the hood had for us, right? My mom has to do some growing. And that meant sitting next to me and asking those real questions. Okay, Ma, that's what they mean in the show. Yep, I've seen that. I've been there. I've done that. She's doing the growing. Now, this year, she's running around trying to find anything that says proud mom or, my gay kids or, all the things. And for me, that means the world because who else do I care about? Not that I needed her acceptance, right? Because I was going to be me regardless, right? But having my mom in my corner, having my mom always have, I come home, mama, this happened. Oh, baby, got you. What you want to do? Did it, that is immensely. I can't even begin to explain the difference between the level of peace I have now that me and mama are on the same terms versus back when I came out to her. It's deep. So do the learning, do the growing on your own. Be there, show up for your kid, and let them know that no matter what the world is going to put at them, you got their back.
If I can offer, my youngest kiddo identifies as queer, genderqueer. And it started, I think, when they were in the third grade and they're now freshmen in high school. So as we have made the transition from elementary school, middle school, high school, the kid is involved in athletics, is involved in a lot of different things. So as a parent, first and foremost, being present for my kid, knowing that whenever there's a question or an issue, conversation needs to be had, mom and dad and big sister are there. We had a whole conversation about name changing, about pronouns, when the kiddo came home from freshman orientation and said, hey, someone said there's this form we can fill out, so the school will know my name and pronouns. All right, let's fill out the form. So again, just being able to sit and listen to what their needs are, what their desires are, and sit without judgment. My husband tends to ask a lot of questions just because he is also trying to understand. I will say as a parent, probably the most difficult thing for me was knowing that my child wanted to be called by a different name than the one that we gave them. That stung. Like, that took a while for us to get to and get through. But again, it was a give and take opportunity to understand, okay, well, tell us what this means and how do we go from here. What I have learned also, I can't buy everything with a rainbow and think my child is going to want to wear it. Very, very true. I buy all the rainbow things. And my oldest daughter is a junior in college. When I went down to pick her up to drive her back home, a couple of weeks ago, we were in her school bookstore, and there was a T-shirt that had Pride and the name of her school. I was like, ooh, we'll get one of these for your sibling. And she said, Mom, everything is not a rainbow. I'm like, okay. So I don't know if my kids are gonna wear it or not, but I think just being open and being willing. I think, and I know we're gonna get to this at some point for the comment or conversation about pronouns and when we misgender, what does that look like, feel like? We also have to take our cues from our kids. So like I said, my child at school uses pronouns and a name different than what most of our family knows. So when families call them to check in, we have to pause and put back on that other hat that for years now, we've grown so accustomed to pushing by the wayside. So what I will always ask my child is, okay, well, what are the rules of engagement or whatever situation we're walking through? So that we know how to show up as a level of protection and support for what
I could not have asked for a better example of how a parent should show up for their child, right? You like, okay, there's a form, I'm gonna do it. You know, I feel some type of way you don't like the name I gave you, but I'm gonna respect your decision to change it, right? I'm gonna follow, I'm gonna call you the name you want, I'm gonna give you the pronoun. That's the gold star right there. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and I just, because see, my daughter, well, she identifies as lesbian, gay, so for me, it's like, it's the whole everything, you know, it's like her, the dress, no dress, no, you know, so it's like, it's still a transition. She's 16, she's gonna be 17, but yet, I don't know if for certain students that they want to identify more of the negative connotation of it, because so it seems like once she changed, everything changed, so then she started going more to that negative group of kids that identified like that versus that positive. So that part is hard to, because it's like, okay, we want to be gangsters and so we got to dress it, we got to do the hoodies. Okay, I get the sexuality, but why do you have to, the whole behavior changes, and that I'm not grasping. Like everything you put in that graph was my child. So it's kind of like, okay, where do I then not feel judged for your sexuality and judged for your behavior alone and start tying those two together? That's what she's doing.
Because that's ultimately is the problem. It's not necessarily who she likes, it's what she's doing currently, right? And I think when you come at her like that, now mind you, she's a teenager, she probably set in her ways, she ready, you know, she about ready to be grown, she's starting to smell herself. So I'm not gonna lie, there's those factors going in, but I can't say you can't pick your child's friends. You got to let them learn their lessons. You got to let it catch a lump or two. You know, then like, okay, that's what that feels like. I don't want that no more, baby. Now mama got you. You feel me? But she gonna choose her friends. She gonna be away from you. What I press and I implore, I'm sure you raised her right. Keep that belief in your head when she walks away from you, and don't let the rest stress you. Because parenting ain't easy. I ain't gonna lie to you.
How do you work with a child whose family is not willing to accept them? And would that be considered neglect or emotional abuse if they still have to be back at home?
I wouldn't call it neglect or emotional abuse. It is traumatic to be in a space where you are not accepted, valued, and given dignity. And so it requires us who are serving them on the other side to show up even better. Those are the sons who need the most love, right? The most hugs, you know, just they just need the basics at that point. So again, I don't think it's neglect, but I do understand how hard it could be to be in a house that don't accept your gender, who won't, you know, call you by your preferred name, won't acknowledge all of the things that you are really learning to advocate for yourself, and they're just willingly saying no. That is hard. And there might not be a clear way out, to be frank, because it kind of is what it is. But provide as much education as you can, resources, tools. You know, hey, mom can reach out. We're Diverse and Resilient, and the Marquee LGBT Center offers great support when it comes to talking with families. So, you know, being able to, hey, you want to bring mom in? We have a youth team at Diverse and Resilient. They got a youth team at Project Q. They work with the families to have those conversations. So use those resources to help bridge that gap as well.
I would just kind of like as like someone that does do like the initial assessment, CPS, other things, it can be neglect and it can be emotional abuse, 1,010%. So while it's not my job to press like my beliefs, my values, my ethics are on someone, my job is to ensure the child's safety. So if you're creating an environment where your child's not safe because of something you're doing or something you're withholding, or because you're making them feel some way, or then they have to do things to themselves or withhold care from themselves, that's a conversation that we need to have. So. Yes, so I think, yeah, using those resources really to try to help the caregiver, the family, the child to understand, like, this is the impact it's having on this individual, and so whether you agree or not, you still gotta make sure the kid's safe. So, yeah, how do we bridge that to make sure that that child's safe, emotionally, physically?
And I think sometimes when reports are made to initial assessment, I'm not an initial assessment worker also, that the report is based on the gender question for the child rather than some of the concerns
Absolutely. I'm gonna say so. What I'm hearing is it's individual based, and if you feel it's based on who the intake caseworker is and how valid they feel the case may be. So is it case by case? Is that a better answer to say?
I think that, like, families are complicated. Every situation is unique to that family. So one, trying to get an accurate picture of what's occurring in this family and understanding where does that conflict stem from. I think that is step one. But if you get information that the conflict stems from a disagreement about what should and should not be permitted with sexuality or gender, and it's leading to an unsafe outcome for the child, we have an obligation to make sure that kid's safe.
I appreciate that.
Again, you don't have the resources. So you're telling me you're gonna remove me from my house, where are you gonna put me? You don't have the resources. So that's where I'm like, you're right. That's when that education comes in. And that says, since you started with me, how willing are you and how many hours you wanna put in giving me my resources in here.
Mm-hmm.
For myself and my family, because you might put me in a worse situation because you don't have a place or any place for me.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes even when family members are explored, there's always the little tiny something that happens 20 years ago, so you can be with your aunt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my aunt understands me, and she's the one who has a relationship with me. But because something that happens 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, and was resolved, you can't place me there.
Mm-hmm.
She's the one who has kept me afloat.
Those nuances are real. And I always feel for kids with those complex cases where we are weighing what's going to be best for you, especially when they're LGBTQ. And like you say, we don't have the best resources throughout our state. Courage has 5 beds. That's not enough to service the entire state of Wisconsin. So we do lean that burden kind of heavy on them. Otherwise, we leave our kids in predicaments that we can't control. I appreciate that. Anything else before we move? I'm going to try to rush through the next couple slides before we run out of time. Let's talk about the cost of the closet. I'm just going to go through a couple statistics this is for LGBT people in the workplace, right? Because we don't think that it just ends in childhood. We have to think about what they're going to be dealing with for the rest of their lives. We talk about almost a coming out process each and every time you're talking to somebody or you go into a new place. If you're talking about someone whose gender identity or gender expression is different from how people would normally perceive them, the type of pressure they're dealing with work. So some great stats here. I won't read over them, but you know that they were made available. So how do we create safety and social support for LGBTQ people? Through trauma-informed approaches and allyship. So I've been saying ally, like I want my allies louder and prouder, and that's because it really does have to be that way. So when we talk about allyship, we're talking about someone who stands up, advocates, supports, and speaks out in solidarity with members of a marginalized group. An ally typically does not identify as a member of the group they support. Right? So remember, ally is not a sexual orientation or gender identity, but is expressed through action. Right? So I need loud and proud allies to be doing actionable items to make safety and belonging for every LGBTQ person possible in Wisconsin. Right? That's in our workplace, that's at our homes, that's where we volunteer, that's when we go on our flights, that's when we at the grocery store. It is a continual thing to be an ally, and it is a heavy burden to bear, right? But again, that is what is required if we are going to create a Wisconsin that allows every Wisconsinite to thrive. When we talk about inclusive spaces, do not assume the sexual orientation or gender identity of other people. Even if you walk into diverse and resilient, don't assume we're all gay, right? Don't assume everybody at the LGBT center is gay, right? There could be some allies in the room. You know, I might bring my good Judy. Hey, Judy, these are my boys, not yours, okay? So thank them. Show appreciation for their trust. If someone comes out to you, thank you for sharing that story with me. Not, oh, I knew it. You gave me gay vibes. We've got to be past that. We got to be past that, right? So appreciating them for trusting you and giving you that story and feeling that they can be their authentic self with you. You should be honoring that moment. Take their identity at face value. Oh, you ain't passing. You don't look like no girl. So why would I call you she, her? That ain't your job. Who made you judge and jury? Right? It is our job. So again, accept what they give us and love them as they are.